Hello, everyone. My name is Pam Keith, and tonight I am hosting a discussion about what needs to be done to win the state of Florida for Democrats in 2022. Many of you may know who I am. I was the Democratic nominee for Florida's 18th congressional district in this past election. But prior to that, I was just an activist, a rabble-rouser, and a candidate here in Florida, not just in my district of CD18, but also my first district at running for office was in 2016 when I ran for U.S. Senate. The reason I wanted to tell you that is because that was my first attempt at running at anything. And the only way I had any kind of possibility of running, the only thing I was able to do really was to get in my car and drive all over the state of Florida and speak to any crowd that would give me an audience, a club, a circus, a church, a county fair, anywhere that I could speak, I spoke. And so I drove all 67 counties of the state of Florida, put 117,000 miles on my car. So while it is true that I know a lot about my district, I know a lot about the state just generally. I also know pretty well how it contrasts to the state of Georgia, where I spent the last 5 days of the special election helping to turn out the vote that we did turn out and flip that state blue. We got 2 Senate seats. Now, there was a lot of play in that, but there are a lot of people out there wondering, well, if it can be done in Georgia, can it be done in Florida? Well, that's why I'm having this conversation with you all. Because the answer is yes, comma, but no, comma, but yes. And what I mean by that is, yes, we absolutely can turn Florida blue in 2022. But the dynamics of Florida are very different than the ones in Georgia, and I'm going to explain that to you. I'm also going to explain to you what are some of the structural and technical things that are going on in Florida that have made it very, very challenging for Democrats. And of course, if we're going to have a conversation, we better have a conversation about solutions as well. But before I get to anything, I want to make a few things clear. Number one, I am a Democrat. I've been a Democrat all my life, and I have no desire to be anything but a Democrat. I love my party. I love what it stands for, but I can be critical of my party. This discussion is not about bashing or attacking anyone. There were decisions that have been made in the past, and it's not about me trying to excoriate anybody, but merely to give examples of missed opportunities. Also, my goal is to make sure that we win. And I'm ruthless in that. Let us win, because winning is so incredibly important when we understand what we are facing, what's on the other side. Also, I want to make clear that this is not about trying to be divisive. It's about speaking truth. And those of you who follow me on social media know that I am absolutely fearless in my willingness to put words to the things that we probably know but don't typically say. So if you're easily offended, this may not be the discussion for you. But I'm going to call out what's going on here in Florida, what's going on nationally, and how we skin this cat. The best way I can do that is to walk you through what's going on, who are the population that we need to move, how do we do it, and give real concrete solutions as to how to win Florida. So without further ado, I want to tell you a little bit of the 411 of Florida. Florida is weird. It is a southern state, though, and a lot of times people tend to forget that. It is a southern state, and it has a lot of the scars of the and traditions and notions of other southern states. The most southern part of Florida is the area that people tend to be most familiar with, the Miami-Dade part of Florida that has a very significant Cuban population. And that Cuban population is unique because it actually is broken down into different waves of Cuban immigrants. It has a wave that came in the early 20s and 30s, much less well-known nationally than the wave that came in the 60s in response to the Bay of Pigs and the revolution in Cuba. That population is much, much bigger, but also motivated differently. Because obviously if they were coming here, it's because there was nothing left for them back in Cuba. And that means that their properties were taken, their businesses were taken, and they were basically forced to start over here in Florida. So they come from a different, they came here for a different reason, and they have different motivations. But we've also had quite an influx of Cubans after the 80s. And that influx of Cubans is also different, leaving Cuba for different reasons and having different resources to bring to the table when they got here. But the thing you must know most about Florida is that Florida is a state that has been under Republican control for 22 years. Republicans have controlled not just the governorship, but also the state house and the state legislature. And more importantly, Republicans control other kinds of social institutions throughout the state: churches, schools, school boards, sheriffs, even social constructs in Florida are dominated by Republicans. Social constructs like just golf clubs. I mean, people come here to golf. It's a big thing to do. But most of that golf culture of Florida is dominated by Republicans. And it's important that you understand that, because even though Florida technically has more registered Democrats than Republicans, it is a state in which the dominance of Republicans is expressed in virtually everything we engage. If you go to a Publix, you have to know that Publix leans Republican, right? If you go, which is our supermarket, if you go to get your nails done, right, you have to understand that that business is in all likelihood going to be catering to Republicans. One of the things that is most ubiquitous about Florida, and it really doesn't matter what part of the state you're in, is that if you go into any public space that has a television, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be airing Fox News. It's kind of the background noise of Florida. And it's quite a thing to go into a space and say, hey, I want you to turn that off. Considered very rude. And yet they don't see Fox News as extreme right. They see it sort of as the default. It's really, really important that you understand that and how pervasive that is. People come to Florida often to check out. It is considered quite rude to engage in political conversation in our state. And more importantly, it's often considered unsafe. Not only can you end up in very heated discussion, but most Floridians, especially those that don't live in dominant blue areas, don't feel comfortable admitting that they're Democrats. I cannot tell you the number of times that I have traveled across the state and have had a meeting, a gathering, and people say, oh gosh, I'm shocked to see so many Democrats. I had no idea that there were this many Democrats in my area. That is the truth in places that have huge numbers of Democrats. Because even when they do have huge numbers of Democrats, those numbers don't seem to match the number of Republicans. There's only a few places in our state where really the Democrats outnumber the Republicans. And even in those areas, they don't feel themselves and they don't assert themselves as you would expect Democrats to do in other parts of the country. So that's what you need to know about Florida. Let me tell you a little bit more about the population of the state. Florida has about 3 million African-American people who are not Latino or Hispanic. Now, that's about the same population as Georgia, but Florida has 21 million people. Georgia only has about 9.5. So 3 million out of 9 is a lot. 3 million out of 21, not so much, but 3 million out of 21 can make a huge difference in elections if they all participate. We also have to keep in mind that because we don't have democratic dominance in things like public schools and public housing and so forth, you got to ask yourself, well, what in Florida causes people to choose to be Democrats? In truth, most of our Democrats are either natural Democrats, which I will explain shortly, or inherited Democrats. We have a lot of people who come to Florida from other parts of the country and settle here, either for the son or to retire, and they bring their Democratic bent and leaning with them. And so they are natural Democrats because they've always been Democrats. They come here and are Democrats when they get here. But there's a very important missing element, which is that the institutions, the media, the social pressure, just the casual conversation that causes people to lean Democrat in other parts of the country are largely missing here. And so now I want to talk to you about what this evening is really about and why I think it's so important to have this conversation. To my way of thinking, if you want to win as Democrats, you have basically 3 missions. Mission number 1 is to Democrats. Mission number 2 is to motivate Democrats. And mission number 3 is to turn out Democrats in elections. Now, I am not going to spend a lot of time talking about Democratic turnout in this discussion, principally because we're actually pretty good at that. Our last Democratic Party chair put a lot of energy and emphasis on vote by mail, successfully so. We had dramatic increases in participation because of vote by mail, and also focusing on registering people who are already motivated to vote or could be motivated to vote. Really important that we got those people out, and we did that successfully. We had better Democratic turnout in this last election than we ever have. So kudos to the folks who worked on that. And it wasn't just the party itself. We had a lot of grassroots organizing in the state. In fact, I think we're really good at that. Grassroots getting to people who are Democrats and getting them excited about voting. That on the grassroots level, we actually do quite well here. But there are those two other components that are crucial: creating Democrats and motivating Democrats. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. When I say creating Democrats, just ask yourself, if you're living in Illinois, or if you're living in California, New York, or New Jersey, or Idaho, what makes you decide to be a Democrat? What makes you decide to be a Democrat? Right? It may be something that you were raised with in your family. It may be something that you pick up while you're in school or in college. Maybe it's part of your work, or maybe there's something about you that naturally gravitates to the Democratic Party or the Democratic platform, right? I'm an African-American woman, as you can tell, and African-Americans are natural Democrats. And I'm going to say something that is absolutely true, and I know it could step on some toes, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's a reason why Black people are Democrats. Because it's bred in the bone of Black people to pay attention to who has our back and who has enmity towards us. It is bred in the bone. It had to be. It is a survival mechanism for Black people to be on the lookout for who is going to be harmful to us. Back in the day, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, and for the long time, the overwhelming majority of Black people were Republicans. And that was the case right up until Richard Milhous Nixon decided that the Republican Party was going to embrace segregationist and Jim Crow advocates to expand their electoral impact in the South. They embraced the people who attack Black people. So when you do that, we know that you don't have our best interest at heart. That's not complicated, right? If you are enabling and standing with and defending and protecting the people who hurt Black people, then we're not going to be with you. And because it is a matter of absolute survival to know where the threat to you and your family is coming from, this is something that is passed down from generation to generation. I was born into a Democratic household. My parents taught me that the Democratic Party is the party that protects Black people. The Republican Party is the one that does not, right? That's what I was raised with. And everything that I encountered as an adult echoed that sentiment. So it would take a lot to get me to move off of that. And for a while in the 80s and 90s, I think the Republican Party actually understood that it needed to do something to move Black people off of the Democratic Party, and reached out and had some success. George W. Bush, H.W. Bush started with this real concerted effort to bring African Americans into the conservative movement. And to some extent, we're quite successful, focusing on social issues like gay rights and abortion and women's rights and so on. And so there is a conservative bent of Black people in this country who would much prefer to be part of a conservative movement. But that being said, there's still no question that the Republican Party over the last decade or more has been the party of white grievance. Angry and dissatisfied and frustrated by advances made by Black people. And so we need to understand that Black people are natural Democrats. Until something dramatically changes in our politics, Black people are natural Democrats. So let's do this. The other thing that you need to know is that what happened on January 6th made it all but impossible for the Republican Party to come back from their embrace of white supremacy and racism anytime in the near future. I know that some of you have watched me on social media say, hey, I'm kind of glad that it happened, because there's no walking that back. You say, Proud Boys, stand by and stand strong. You've sent a very loud message to the Proud Boys, but an even louder message to Black people all over the country. We know who you are. There's no in the tongue. So let's drive that as Democrats. Know that we have a natural constituency in African Americans. It absolutely showed up in Georgia and delivered 2 Senate seats. We know this, right? So let's put as a priority of people who would be naturally inclined to become Democrats as African Americans. It's always been the case, but let's just put it in front of our mind. Another constituency that's a natural Democrat is young people. Young people are natural Democrats for a variety of reasons, but one of the main reasons that they are is because their social circles and their social networks are not particularly interested in authoritarianism generally. And more importantly, they're just the artists and the athletes and the people who are influencing them tend to be far more to the left, and they tend to gravitate that way. Just so I can break it down so you understand. My demographic age band, people over 75 are the only ones that are more Republican than Democrat in our country. People that are baby boomers are actually slightly more Democrat by about a couple points. People that are Gen X are more Democrat by like 5 or 6 points. Then there's the Gen Y. They're like, the millennials, Gen Y, right? They are way more Democrat. We're talking about 11 to 12 points more D than R. Then you consider the Gen Z. These are the people who are just aging into voting right now. 22 points more D than R. So young people are natural Democrats for the most part, and as long as we get to them, get them engaged, we can get them to vote Democrat. But the problem is they're not real big joiners. They're not big fans of party politics. They love our policy, but they don't necessarily love our party. But that is an area of growth and opportunity. We need to be thinking of them as natural Democrats and put it in our priority to make young people Democrats. The other kind of folks that I think are naturally Democrats are immigrants. And the reason that they're natural Democrats, in my view, is because the Republican Party hates them, right? And makes clear that they don't want these people here. When we say we embrace immigrants because we see their contribution, that their contribution is not just how much money they bring to the table, but their innovation, their culture, their style, all the things that they add to the American fabric, that we want them here. What happens from the GOP side is that they exploit immigrant labor and then demonize immigrants left, right, and center because they fear the DNA that is drowning this country. That's what's going on. I mean, let's just admit it. And so if you're an immigrant and you are made to feel fearful about your ability to stay with your family or to get separated or to lose your employment or you lose your ability to take care of yourself, then of course you're going to be naturally disinclined to support the party that's coming at you. So most immigrants are naturally going to be Democrats if we do what we need to do to embrace them and to stand for them. And I think that that's another category that I call a natural Democrat. And then there's this sort of the other transplants of Florida who are Democrats because they were always raised that way. And they get here, they're also natural Democrats. They've been Democrats in New York, New Jersey. If you're in Boca Raton or in Palm Beach County, you're going to find a whole lot of New York transplants. They're natural Democrats, right? We don't have to fight for that. But let's get clear. It is our job as a party to decide that we make Democrats and we want to make Democrats. That ought to be something that we embrace as our mission. And sadly, that is not something that the party here or anywhere that I'm aware of has really put its mind to, right? It's more about turning out Democrats that they believe to be natural Democrats than focusing on the fact that we have people who would be natural Democrats and courting them and nurturing them and growing them in that context. That is the mission of creating Democrats. And that is something that I want to talk about. The next thing I want to talk about is motivating Democrats. And the way we need to think about that is what makes you decide that you want to get involved? What makes you decide that you want to vote? What makes you decide that this is your team, right? And what I will tell you is that the Republican Party is magnificent at motivating Republicans. They are fantastic at it, and the Democrats are just not that good at it at all. And the reason that the Republicans are so good at it is because they don't have to rely on their party to do it. They have Fox News and OAN and Newsmax and right-wing extreme radio to do this for them. And they do it for free. And the way that the Republican Party creates Republicans is to constantly sell grievance as a reason to be a Republican. The reason that Republicans choose to be Republicans is because they have something to be angry and dissatisfied about. And if you look closely at what Fox News does, It doesn't just sell a different take or a different opinion. It always includes a reason why the listener ought to be angry, frustrated, aggrieved, believing that it's all terribly unfair and that there's this bias and that they're under attack and they're under siege. The motto of Fox News is just keep them pissed off, because if they keep an audience pissed off, they keep an audience tuned in. And it is perfectly fine with Fox News and its progeny to tell baseless and absolute factual lies to keep people angry. Perfect example was just today. Tucker Carlson on his show claimed that CNN took down the graphics about the number of COVID deaths because a meme on the right is that the only reason Democrats care about COVID and COVID deaths is to make Donald Trump look bad, as if we're so morally corrupted that we couldn't actually feel compassion and empathy for people who are dying, right? That was just flat out false. That graphic was not taken down. And Democrats have not moved off our concern about the number of dead people or what's going on with COVID. We are still talking about it 24/7, 365. But the reason Tucker Carlson talks about it at all, let alone the way that he talks about it, is to show that we are disingenuous in our attacks on the Trump administration for not taking care of COVID and, in fact, subverting and sabotaging our COVID response. They think that that was all transactional and there was no real feeling in Democrats about people dying. And so he sold that lie, right? But the reason he sold that lie was to convince his audience that Democrats are out to get them. And that is what Fox News does. And I remind you that in Florida, Fox News is the default source of communication in our state. So people absorb Fox News passively, even if they're not intentionally looking for it. And it has a way of permeating and coloring the conversation about everything. If you want to talk about a state where people are reading off of two completely different sheets of music in terms of just what is real, Florida is one of those places. Now, whereas the Republican Party in Florida is magnificent at constantly demonizing Democrats and selling to Republicans that there is a reason to be aggrieved, the Democratic side doesn't have anything that compares. And I mean nothing. You are deceived if you think MSNBC is the Democratic version of Fox News. No, it's not. No, it's not. It may have a left bent, but it's not going to divorce itself from reality to sell to Democrats a reason to be aggrieved. It's just not. That's just not their MO. And I'm not suggesting that we ever take that up. But what is clear in this state is that there is Fox News that sells the reason for people to be Republicans and to be angry all the time. It's backed by a Florida Republican Party that is extremely well-funded and well-organized. The bully pulpit of the governorship they've held for 22 years. Local and state offices up, down, and sideways under GOP control. School boards and other kinds of social institutions and churches that are under GOP control. And literally no Democratic messaging machine to combat that at all. And I mean at all. Nationally, people are cognizant of the fact that Ron DeSantis has orchestrated one of the worst COVID responses in the country, right? Nationally, people are cognizant that he was allowing our vaccine to be sort of auctioned off to high rollers who come here to, he called it vaccine tourism. I call that vaccine corruption. Nationally, we knew that. Nationally, we knew that the unemployment response here in our state was abysmal. And people had no money for months and months and months. We had wonderful leaders in our state house, people like Anna Eskamani and Carlos Guillermo Smith and Annette Tadeo, who were constantly ringing the alarm about people who were not being able to access their unemployment benefits, right? And nationally, it was a scandal. Was it a scandal in Florida? Ron DeSantis still enjoys high approval rating in our state. Why is that? Because our state doesn't talk about his failings. Our state is Fox News. So who is making Floridians aware of how horrible Ron DeSantis is? Whose job is that? Is that the Florida Democratic Party's job? Is that the job of candidates? Whose job is that? Well, at the moment, nobody's taking up that mantle. And so Ron DeSantis skates in all of his criminality and all of his immorality with absolutely no one or nothing landing punches on him. So it ought not surprise you that he still enjoys popularity and high approval ratings in our state. That ought not surprise you because there's nobody undermining his narrative here. And Fox News is backing him up 24/7, 365. Same is true with Marco Rubio and Rick Scott. Yeah, maybe the Washington Post writes an op-ed that's negative, or maybe somebody on social media calls them out. We've got Facebook just like everybody else. We've got Twitter just like everybody else. But is that what the casual consumer absorbs? Heck no. Absolutely not. And so we have a real problem here with an absolute incongruity of messaging. Florida is a desert of Democratic messaging. And this gets compounded by the fact that our election system is set up the way it is. Some of you may know that Florida has one of the last primaries in the election cycle. Usually it's at the last week of August. The reason that was set up that way is because it extends the amount of time that candidates are fighting each other and compresses the amount of time that the parties are fighting each other. Now, if you're the incumbent, that's a great thing because you're usually not going to be challenged. So what happens in Florida is you start your election cycle in maybe January or February, sometimes even earlier than that, right? And you fight other Democrats and you only message to primary voters who are Democrats, right? Until the 28th of August. And then between the 28th of August and November 3rd, you're supposed to be able to mount a true fight and challenge to an incumbent who has been able to sit on his money all that time and has not been hit about the head and neck with messaging at all. At all. It is ridiculous that we expect candidates to be able to raise the kind of money to both weaken the Republican incumbent and beat their primary opponent at the same time. Nobody can do that. Nobody can do that. So in the last gubernatorial race, we had a slew of really good candidates, any of whom would have been a far sight better than Ron DeSantis. But it was a bloody battle between Gwen Graham, a strong candidate, Andrew Gillum, an excellent candidate, Phil Levine, a strong candidate, Chris King, a strong candidate. They were all strong candidates, and they spent their resources battling each other. And by the way, messaging to preaching to their choir. They were not expanding the Democratic base at all. They were simply preaching to the ones who were already primary voters. That is folly. So it should not surprise you that a really bad candidate who got blown out of the water in both debates, who couldn't generate a crowd, still managed to turn out the kind of GOP turnout that he was able to because he was required to generate it. The party generated it for him. The converse is true for Andrew Gillum. Between August 28th and November 6th, he had to not only get flooded with money, but try to build an infrastructure to talk to everybody he hadn't talked to up until August 28th. And then we were surprised that he missed the mark. It's remarkable that he got within 36,000 votes, given how much of a structural disadvantage he had to deal with. If we want to win Florida in 2022, we cannot repeat that mistake. Somebody's going to have to be responsible for landing punches on DeSantis. Somebody's got to be responsible for landing punches on Marco Rubio. And it cannot be the person you expect to be the nominee, because that person isn't going to have the capacity to raise enough money to do what they have to do to get their own nomination across the line while also weakening the Republicans. So if we want to win, we've got to decide that we're going to do that offensive battle, intra-party battle for our nominee, whoever he or she may be. Second of all, we need to start messaging now. And I cannot emphasize this enough. We need to start messaging now, because every day that Ron DeSantis stays in the governorship and moves past the COVID's worst peaks is the day that he's rehabilitating his image in our state. We can't let that happen. I remind you, there is no messaging in our state at the moment that is making people cognizant of how lousy a job Ron DeSantis is really doing. You may be seeing it in New York or New Jersey or California, but you're not seeing it here in Florida. And that is a serious problem. The other thing I will say is this. When I talk about motivation and the fact that Fox News is constantly motivating around anger and fear and demonization, we've got to be willing to be ruthless too. I'm not saying be dishonest, but we got to be able to throw some punches here and there too. Democrats need to get more willing to be aggressive. I hate to say it, but in our state, Democrats are not aggressive. Most really want to be bipartisan, which is okay, which is fine, but it withholds their ability to call out that which really angers them. And even those who are not in the, can we all kumbaya space, still have hesitancy to be aggressive, given that we always feel like such the minority in our state, even if we're technically not. So there's this reticence, this reserve, some of it's stylistic. Maybe it's generational. I don't know. But Dems don't throw punches in our state. And that is a problem. Right now, there are really sound, smart punches to be thrown, and somebody's got to be throwing them, because that's how you weaken the target. That is how you put the Republicans on the defensive. They have a lot to fight for and explain, and it gets more complicated for everybody when Donald Trump makes Florida his home base with all of the network of all of that crazy Trumpism that comes with that. It comes with crazies, but it also comes with a lot of money. So now we need to know that we're fighting this on both fronts. I believe that we do need a network that competes with Fox News, not one that's full of lies, but one that unabashedly speaks from the progressive perspective. That's another conversation for another day. But at a minimum, we ought to have some entity. Maybe it's the Midas Touch people. Maybe it's the Project Lincoln people. Maybe it's the 11 Films, or maybe it's, I don't know. Maybe it's the DNC. I don't know who it is, but somebody needs to be running ads right now explaining that if you haven't gotten an unemployment check for 6 months, it's Ron DeSantis's fault. It's the Florida GOP's fault. If you don't have any kind of food on your table, whose fault is that? The party in power. Make them own it. If you were outraged by what you saw on January 6th, whose fault is that? The Republicans. Make them own it, and don't ever let them walk away from it, because they're going to try to change the conversation once we get closer to the election. And it will be back to that refrain about socialists and socialism and extremism, right? Because that mantra worked. It worked in this state for particular reasons that I will get to in a moment. But they don't hesitate to demonize us. And they have the constant refrain of Fox News to hammer it home, both in an aggressive way and in a passive way. There is ubiquitous messaging in the state of Florida about Democrats all being socialists. It is wall to wall. And if we have any hope of competing, we've got to say, well, at least we're not seditionists. At least we're not traitors or racists. Right? At least we actually care about COVID and think science is real. We can make those messages, and those messages can land because we have plenty of natural Democrats in this state, many of whom are just not engaged in politics because they don't hear anything from Democrats except for the last 6 weeks of the election. That's not a winning strategy, and we're not going to win if we stay that way. The last thing I will say is this. We have to think out of the box on how to get people to connect to what we are doing. Many of you are aware that after Hurricane Maria, a lot of Puerto Ricans came to Florida. There was a lot of speculation that those people would be natural Democrats. Those people would lean towards Democrats and certainly be angry at Donald Trump for his response to Hurricane Maria. But many of you may not know that the way Rick Scott played that was actually brilliant. So we were the ones, the Democrats, fought for support for those Puerto Ricans who came here. We fought for that. We also fought to make sure that there was airlift and food. A lot of the elected officials here in Florida went out of their way to help the Puerto Ricans who got here. But you know what Rick Scott did? He had this giant banners throughout every airport every airport that said, "Welcome to Florida," and Rick Scott. Rick Scott. All of the paperwork that they had to fill out, all of the paperwork, it said, "Welcome to Florida," and it said, Rick Scott. Now, he had the bully pulpit to do that. It was the governor of the state. But do you know how many Puerto Ricans actually thought that all of the help they got from Rick Scott? Which is exactly why Donald Trump wanted his names on all those stimulus checks. If you think everybody pays attention and knows who's on their side and who's not, not true. So where were the Democrats? Did we have ads welcoming Puerto Ricans and telling them it's the Democrats that are here for them? If we did, it was on small scale. Certainly on a scale that Rick Scott could bring to the table, right? Same thing with Venezuelans. If you want to know that why Venezuelans were so open to the messaging that Democrats are socialists, is because we were not messaging that Republicans are authoritarians. Because what they were escaping in Maduro was not just socialism, it was the fact that he's a dictator. And he stole from them the ability to have elections and have their voice heard. So the question is, why didn't we own that more? Well, the answer is, we didn't know whose job it was to own it. And if we did, that person may not have had the resource, or that entity may not have had the resources to do so. Florida is a state that cannot be cracked easily with messaging to particular groups because they have such nuanced interests and backgrounds. So it's hard to message with one message statewide in Florida to Democrats. But you know what's actually really easy? Messaging statewide against Republicans. That's actually really easy. A message that calls out Ron DeSantis or Marco Rubio or Rick Scott will work anywhere in the state of Florida. That if you do some messaging on socialism or why we're not socialists, that's not going to work in the Panhandle like it's going to work in Miami. So let's think about what works everywhere and start doing that now. And that is messaging that lands punches on Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott. That can work. That works everywhere, and it needs to start working now. So I've said a lot. I'm gonna give you one last thought about how we actually pull this off, and then I will start taking your questions. While I mentioned earlier in our discussion that there are about 3 million African Americans, and I believe that African Americans are natural Democrats, and they're going to be natural Democrats for generations to come. What's interesting is that the concentration of African Americans is not in the same way that it is in Georgia. In Georgia, you have this huge number in Atlanta, right, with a large number in Savannah and maybe Valdosta, and you have this African American intelligentsia with money and resources and universities and so forth. Florida, you have some of that around the HBCUs like FAMU and Bethune-Cookman, but you don't have, there is no massive Black concentration in a city in Florida. It's just dispersed. It's not concentrated like that. Fort Lauderdale is not the same as Detroit, right? Neither is Orlando. Orlando is not equivalent to the south side of Chicago. Not the same thing. Population-wise, doesn't match. So if you're going to actually move Black people, then you got to figure out where they are. And one of the things that's interesting about Florida is that the counties that have the highest percentage total of African Americans are not the counties that you hear about, right? They're not in Miami-Dade. That is where the party pours its efforts. But let me tell you, 56% of the population of Gadsden County is African American. 56%. Do we have a strong Democratic presence in Gadsden County? In fact, many of our big name candidates don't ever go there because it's a small county with a small population overall. It's no bang for their buck. But if you were to look at a map, you would see that the northern part of Florida looks a lot like the southern part of Georgia. And even though they're not necessarily the biggest numbers, they're the highest percentage of natural Democrats. And those who are registered vote at high percentages. but we don't do the work to register more people and bring them into the process because we don't pour resources into the northern part of the state. It's viewed as absolutely ruby red, and so we don't bother. And I think that's a mistake. If I had the option, I would be setting up Democratic operations all through the northern part of Florida because there are natural Democrats up there that we can convert through social pressure and social mechanisms to become voters, and not just to become voters, but to become active in getting other people to vote. That is the magic of African American community vote, is that we do socially pressure each other. We do. When we're talking about elections and it's on top of our mind, then our churches get involved, our sororities, our fraternities, all of our social structures put pressure on people to vote. But if nobody's talking about the election in your neck of the woods, it doesn't matter how naturally inclined you would be to vote Democrat. Ain't nobody talking about it. You'll forget about it. You'll move on. You don't know who the candidate is. They never showed up in your neck of the woods. So why would you care? That is a mistake. And we need to correct that mistake. So if it were up to me, I would put hard physical location in northern Florida, in maybe Gadsden County or in Leon County, where Tallahassee is. That is the seat of the state, right? And that is also where the head of the Democratic Party is. And somehow it doesn't get its tentacles out to Hamilton County. It doesn't get its tentacles out to Madison County and some of these other northern Florida counties, right? You look at counties like Jefferson County, 34% African American. Jackson County, almost 30% African American. Hamilton, 32. Leon, 32. Columbia, 18. Duval is 30%, where Jacksonville is. That's 30% African American. By contrast, Miami-Dade is like 10. Right? So, yeah, there's a lot of Democrats in Miami-Dade, but the natural Democrats are not necessarily there. And if a little bit of investment will go a long way into increasing turnout in those smaller counties and creating new Democrats. Because one of the things we are not honest with ourselves is that, yeah, we get high percentage of those who are registered, but we have low percentage of registration overall. That's something we need to know about. We can do better. And we're going to have to do better if we're going to want to compete. So that's something that we really think about. Another thing that I want to make sure that we understand is that getting to young people is a difficult nut to crack in the state. Again, they're dispersed and they have a lot of other stuff on their mind. And the natural democratic pressures that you would get in a city or in another state, you don't get here. So how do we get young people involved? Not just in standing for our values, but actually participating and registering and voting and being Democrats. We got a huge boost from Parkland and the young people owning the gun control conversation in the state of Florida. That was really big. And we need to pour more energy and more support into that. But there's another way to do this. And what I've learned is that the best way to get young people to do something is to let them do it their way. So here's my proposal. Let's get a pot of money together. Let's say $250,000. That's not a huge number in Florida politics. Let's get a pot of $250,000 and create a competition for young people between the ages of 15 and 20 for the best video meme, the best spoken word poetry, the best visual art, the best music video, the best dance that expresses Democratic Party values, and put real money to that so that the winning prize is maybe $50,000, and get the teams to compete against each other for that money and say, hey, you got to register as a Democrat and you got to do something that's artistic and creative that expresses you and what you think about Democratic policy or platform, some issue that's really important to you, and you compete for that $50,000. That's a way to generate social media conversation. And because it's real money, now they're like, okay, I like visual arts. I like graphic arts. I like rapping. I like video. These are things that the young people are doing anyway. Say, hey, show us that you get why we support LGBT rights. So, put something about that. Talk about climate change in your spoken word. I mean, we could have 2 or 3 more Amanda Gormans right here in Florida if we put money and resources behind it. But let me tell you what that does. That gets young people talking to each other about our values. And it moves away from simply being a young person who cares about gay people to a young person who's going to vote Democrat. And that's why we need to have that process in place. That is a way to reach our natural Democrats that we have not done so, right? Another way is to absolutely get to those immigrants and the people who are made to feel other. Now, in my county, in St. Lucie County, we have a population of immigrant Latinos that are not Cuban. They come here as migrant workers. Have we done the work to really connect with them and really start to build a sense of home and community and a desire to have them here? No, we have not. Not that we couldn't, but we haven't yet. Again, a question of resources. And also, cost benefit analysis. If they're not going to vote, why should I spend my money on that? Because that's how you build voters for the future, right? We should have Democratic Party connection to every language school and citizenship school in the state of Florida. We should have a Democratic Party welcoming team at every airport or port of entry. That's a way that people get to that we're the good guys. Because otherwise, all they're going to hear is that we're the bad guys. And they're not going to know anything about us one way or another to judge it fairly. So we got to get in early and make those connections now. And lastly, I will say this. We need to understand the nuances of the diaspora within our state. I spent a lot of time with the Haitian community, and it is an interesting community. You'd be surprised at how many Haitians ended up voting for Donald Trump in 2016, despite his obvious racism. And the way he connected with them was first, he went and gave a speech in Little Haiti, so that helped. And he connected with them on religion. He said that he was the one who was going to protect Christianity and the right to practice your religion. Now, I happen to know that there are two things that really drive the Haitian community here, be they Democrat or Republican. One is immigration status, TPS, and birthright citizenship, and the other is education. They come here to give their children educational opportunities. So we ought to be selling to the Haitian community, not just that we believe in public education, but that we believe in helping meeting them where they are with homework support in Creole if they don't have English speaking at the home. Like, we're seeing their challenges. And let me tell you something. They didn't have any idea that Donald Trump had floated getting rid of birthright citizenship for purely racist reasons. Do you think they might have been interested in the fact that Donald Trump intended for their children to lose their citizenship because they were born here to Haitian parents? Don't you think that might have, motivated them somewhat? Of course it would. Of course it would. But did we bombard the Haitian community with messaging about immigrant rights and how we would never support ending birthright citizenship? That was another missed opportunity. So we need to know that there are natural constituencies in the state that have been under-resourced and under-motivated and under-spoken to, and that we have to start working on those communities now, because those are the communities that are going to be easiest to convert from non-voter to Democrat or Democrat-leaning to Democrat voting. But it is the air cover, the television ubiquitous messaging that does the motivation. It tells people why it's critical to actually go vote, right? That's the messaging. And even if we cannot message people to choose to vote because of the Democratic platform, we can do so much more in getting them to not vote Republican because they're crazy and seditionist and incredibly racist. We can do that. And we need to be doing that right away. I think I've said enough about my vision for this. We need to have on the ground voter development in those northern parts of the state. We need to have much more thoughtful bases for connection and get ahead of the negative messaging about Democrats that everybody in the state is going to get. We need to let young people be their own motivation to inspire each other to get involved and put incentives in place that make them want to do it, like real money. But there's one other thing that's going to make winning Florida so much easier, and it's this: deliver. Deliver. If the Democrats deliver on COVID response, if they deliver on stimulus, if they deliver on relieving debt, if they deliver in keeping people from being evicted, if we deliver, we don't have to beg people to vote for us. And it will not matter whether the Republicans call it socialist or not. If you're eating and you aren't, you're glad. If you're in housing and you were about to lose it, you're glad. If you have finally been able to get back to hugging your friends and going out, you're going to know who made that happen. So we as Democrats have to deliver. And if Republicans choose to obstruct us, they will do so purely because they know as well as we do that if we do succeed and we do deliver, their chances of regaining power become very, very small. They want us to fail, which is all the more reason we need to be absolutely ruthless in our pursuit of success. So that's what I have to say. We can win Florida, but we're going to have to do it now. We're going to have to do it differently. We're going to have to focus on places we haven't focused before. I am now super excited to take your questions, and I hope you found this helpful and informative. But that's the way I think we need to skin this. We need to start thinking that it is our job to create Democrats, and that if we do so, it will become a whole lot easier to turn out Democrats. All right, so let me see what questions here. I have a lot of good questions. I have a question from Mari. Mari is my technical person. I have a question which says, when I moved to Florida, it was blue. What happened? We had a great governor in Governor Graham some years ago. But what happened was Fox News. I cannot overstate how ubiquitous it is in the state of Florida. It permeates everything, literally everything. And it made it so much easier for Republicans to message because they didn't have to spend money demonizing Democrats. Fox News did it for them. So they could spend their money really on connecting to Republicans. One of the things that's interesting about the Republican Party of Florida is that they have very sophisticated mechanisms for identifying Republicans and speaking to them year round. They don't wait for candidates to emerge. They go ahead and start messaging to them on behalf of the Republican Party. It helps them keep their data updated, and it also helps them to chase votes, and it helps them to connect to their voters. So the Republican Party speaks to Republicans year round. The Democratic Party in Florida does not really speak to voters. It speaks to members of the Democratic Party, and they're through clubs and caucuses, of which there are many. I have been to so many clubs and caucuses, and please don't get it twisted. I love our clubs and caucuses, but they are not mechanisms for speaking to voters. It's almost entirely the burden of candidate campaigns to speak to voters. And like I said, because our primary is so late in the cycle, we don't speak to new voters, independent voters, and frequent voters until that period between the end of August and November, which is just too short a time to truly compete for that population. So it's very difficult. That's what happened. And that's from Michelle French. So thank you for your question, Michelle. You said, what's the best issue to try and unify people around? Where should we focus first? Absolutely no question. It's about getting COVID under control. I think people really want to hear that we have a plan and a solution. It should surprise no one that our COVID response has been basically the Hunger Games of vaccine in the state of Florida. It's all about who you know and people hoarding vaccine, and I got a hookup, and so I got 5 that I'm hoarding over here, and you just, girl, I come on over. I got it should surprise no one that that's the way it is, because that's the way everything is in Florida. It's about who you know, and so getting a smart, systematic response to COVID that people can see is obviously going to be a huge difference. But let me tell you, nothing is more motivating than money. When I tell you that it is mission critical that Joe Biden deliver on that $1,400 and increase that and get money to people. So some people think that's transactional. Oh, you're buying votes. Okay, yes, and let's do. If it works, let's do. Go ahead, give them more, go big. Democrats need to go big to get people money. Everybody loves that. You can sell it on the progressive side as relief and empathetic support for people who are struggling, but you can also sell it on the Republican side as the stimulus and the circulation of cash that small businesses are desperately in need of. Because here in Florida, we're open, but the customers haven't come back because they don't have any money to spend. So you give money to people to spend in the economy, they're going to spend it in small business. Small business will know that their business came back, right? So, but if we're going to do it, we better boast about it. That's something that Democrats need to get much better at. We do stuff and we tell people, look, we did such and such. Not good enough. We need to be boasting it from the mountaintops. If we get something done for the people, no matter what it is, it should be, Thank you, Democrat. Democrats did this for you. The Republicans tried to block us and we fought through. We love you. We're focused on you. We ought to be boasting from the mountains on high. We ought to be telling everybody what we're doing for them. Not intellectually, but in every kind of meme, all over social media. Everybody talking about, if they get $2,000, I want t-shirts all over America that says, thank you for my money, Democrats. That's how we sell who we are. We can't be surprised if people don't buy if we're not selling. So we need to sell what we do and not just state what we do. And that's going to make a difference. All right, Maya, what's the issue? What's the best issue? Oh, that was your question, Maya. What are the next steps to build a coalition to win Florida? The next steps is to get on the ground and start connecting to people where they are right now, most especially in the small northern counties where you have untapped potential with natural Democrats. I repeat, we have natural coalition with inherent Democrats in the northern part of Florida who do not see any kind of Democratic activity in their counties right now. Literally none. Like they may have one Democratic club. And a Democratic club in the state of Florida is considered really successful if it has 40 or 50 members, right? That is not a mechanism to get out into the community. It just isn't. So we have to build that. Now, I'm happy to do that, right? Because that's what you do when you're a candidate, right? You organize volunteers. You go out in the community, you knock doors, you shake hands, you go to churches, you do all of that stuff. You're forward looking. That's what a candidate is supposed to do. But they don't see that in the northern part of the state. They don't even have candidates in half of their races up there, let alone any party support that's there when candidates, when we're not in an election cycle. So that is the step number one. Step number two, set up that pot of money for young people and start energizing and building capacity for them to come into the party. There should be multiple paid positions for young people as Florida Democrats. There should be dozens and dozens of them all over the state, right? That's a resource question. But if we can raise $11 million for our gubernatorial candidate in 2018 that came to the table between August 28th and November 6th. Half of that, $6 million for the next 2 years will get so much done and get people so much more engaged. That's where we start. We start by building capacity on the ground and funding it now. And absolutely, it starts by landing punches on the incumbent Republicans now. Take that burden off of your candidates and make that something that is air cover from on high. Bottom line, Florida can't win Florida. America has to decide it wants to win Florida. And if America decides it's going to win Florida, we're going to win Florida. All righty. Let's see. Next question. Joe Biden would not have won without Lincoln Project and other similar style attack ads. Why do the Democrats shy away from the strategy? Hey, Wolf, all I can tell you is I don't know. I think it's a natural view that we want to unify. I mean, I think Joe said it in his inaugural speech, and I think it echoes a sentiment that we really do want to build a unified country. We do. And it feels awful to feel like you have to attack and demonize Republicans or that you have to land punches on what they do. But you do. Not only do we have to get much, much better at bragging, we have to get so much better at blaming. Because we don't really blame Republicans. We just say, hey, they're just being obstructionists or whatever. We don't go all in on the why of it, even though it's in our face. People get so resentful when you call them racist, but then turn around and stand with the Proud Boys. Excuse me. We need to call it out. If the Republicans had 3 words for the 2020 cycle that they repeated every single candidate, every single race, throughout Fox News, throughout OAN, and it was repeated as a mantra. All Democrats are socialists, extremists, and radical. Those were the 3 words. Raise your hand if you heard them in your race, in your neck of the woods. Extremist, radical, socialists. Those are the 3 buzzwords of the GOP. And boy, did they batter us around the head and neck about that. So what were our 3 key words against Republicans? Anybody? Anyone? I don't recall hearing one. I don't recall 3 words that every Democrat said, yep, that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against these 3 things. Some people were messaging on healthcare. Some people were messaging on, just getting back to rationality. Some people were just messaging against Trump. Some people were messaging on impeachment. Some people were talking about wages and small businesses. A lot of people were messaging about COVID. But was there a ubiquitous message, a theme about why people should not vote for Republicans other than Donald Trump is insane? I mean, it was enough to get us 81 million or 84 million votes. That's great. But was it enough to get us votes and the votes we need in Florida? And let me tell you something. I was warning people from day one that we needed to win Florida because Trump had no maneuvering if we had turned Florida blue. I told him, right? I said, hey, every strategy he's going to try to execute is going to be dependent on him having Florida in the red column on election night. So, did we go all in to win Florida? No, we didn't. I think some people thought it wasn't winnable. I think some people thought even if it was winnable, we had safe seats. We didn't compete here like we could have. And sadly, everything that happened after that, between November and the day before yesterday, everything was the result of Donald Trump being able to count Florida in the red column. So let's learn from that and never, ever, ever, ever consider Florida expendable again. It's not. In the next election, it's going to be critical to consolidating the House majority. It's going to be critical to getting another gubernatorial seat under our control. And for 2024, it is absolutely essential that we have these 29 electoral votes in the blue column and not ever give a Republican another plausible argument that they could just, throw out all the Democratic votes in America. Like, we need to do much, much better. And again, I'm not blaming any individual person for that call. I'm simply saying that's what happened. We did not fight for this state like we thought we could. And we got caught flat-footed in a couple of congressionals that we thought were going to come our way because we had much, much stronger candidates. So we got a little bit asleep at the wheel. This was mission critical for the GOP. They treated it that way. And so I think that's something that we need to fix going forward. So excellent question, Wolf. Thank you. Pam, I'm an AD Navy and concerned about how the right-wing media has won the messaging war in the military. How can we start to fight back with our own messaging? I have some ideas, but curious to hear from yours. And this is from Serafina Forte. Hi, Serafino. Thank you for your questions. Great question. Some of you may not know this. When I was in the Navy, there was no partisan media on our military bases at all, right? Like, there was maybe, I think, C-SPAN and the Weather Channel and maybe ESPN, but I'm not even sure it was ESPN. Like, there was nothing. And there was this really, really rigid rejection and stigma to political anything while you were in uniform. Not only was it against the regs and you could get in trouble for it, but there was also just this pervasive attitude that we don't do politics here. We serve whoever's the president and we don't do politics. This is this is one unit and we act as a unit and we're not going to have, divisiveness in this. And that leadership really came from the top, I think. But since then, Fox News, especially under Trump, he made executive orders to insist that Fox News is played everywhere. And then not only Fox News, but now you have the internet and Parler and all this other stuff. And so what happened was people started to feel emboldened to be open about their white supremacist attitude while in uniform, while serving in integrated units and so on. And somehow the leadership of these units didn't feel empowered to shut it down. So it just escalated. So if you're watching my social media, and you should be watching my social media, you should also be following me on the Patreon channel, Pam Keith FL on patreon.com. If you're following it, you're seeing that I am personally and actively advocating for the removal of Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, and any kind of partisan stuff out of our military installations and out of our federal buildings because it's toxic. Right? They're not selling a different opinion. They're selling the opinion that it's okay to attack your own country. I don't care if it's different. It's also seditionist and treasonous. So it being different is not sufficient. It is mission critical that we get divisive noise out of our military units, that we get them off of our military bases. And I swear to God, nowadays, you can go to any unit, it's literally Fox News 24/7, 365. And then people wonder why the military leans Republican, because mechanisms were put in place to indoctrinate them into Republican thinking that built on a natural inclination towards sort of a respect for conformity and deference to authority, which is natural in people who join the military. You kind of have to be okay with that to work in that structure. So it exploited that. And so, this is the first time that a Democrat has won the military vote in a long time. And the reason is, as much as you were able to message on all that noise, there's one thing the military people who took that oath of office are very clear on, and that is that you don't disrespect our fallen brothers and sisters. You don't disrespect, you don't let Russia put bounties on the heads of our troops. Like, you don't do that. And so Donald Trump lost the military vote macroscopically, but the parts that got radicalized in our military are now cancers in their units. Like, how do you get a unit to operate functionally with somebody who's decided that all Black people need to go, or don't belong in America, or all immigrants are vermin or whatever? How do you function as a unit that way? You don't. And so that's why it's absolutely mission critical. And it's also critical to national security, because now these people are obviously easy targets to be converted into assets for our enemies, be it Russia, China, or anybody else. Right? When you're that disgruntled, it's not all that hard to get you to sell national secrets or to turn on your own country. So I assure you that there are people, smarter people than I, that are thinking about skinning this particular cat. But I always believe that when you want to make big changes, you always build a grassroots movement around that. And so that's what I'm doing in my social media. I have made it my personal crusade to get LAN, Fox News, and Newsmax out of all federal installations, because they don't belong there. And for anybody who's confused about whether this is a First Amendment issue, it's not. I'm not saying they can't broadcast, nor what they can or cannot say, right? I'm simply saying you don't have access to our federal buildings, and that is a prerogative of the executive that is absolute. So Joe Biden could pull that off with an executive order and not even have to talk to Congress about it. So yes, he could do it, and I hope he does. Any advice for turning Texas blue in the future? Dresha Bailey. I think Texas is its own unique. But I will tell you, there's some results in Texas that I found very, very interesting. Some of those border towns went hard Trump, and I have a hard time buying it. But since I don't have evidence that shenanigans went down, I'm going to simply say a great deal more work needs to be done in these border communities with people who ought to be natural Democrats. I keep going back to this concept. The job of the Democratic Party is not just to turn out Democrats or to get them to, be motivated. The job of the party is to create Democrats too. And I think Texas probably has some of the same problems that Florida has, where you have your education system in GOP control. You have, other kinds of critical structures, city council, and all these other critical structures that are in GOP control. And there's no overarching Democratic messaging going into Texas. I suspect that everywhere you go in Texas, you're going to see Fox News, and you're not going to see anything on the other side. And I'm sorry, but MSNBC is not the other side, and you're not going to see it anyway. So that is a key component to winning Texas. If we want to win Texas, we want to win Florida. And hey, I'm super excited about states like South Carolina, North Carolina that have even bigger natural Democratic populations. If we want to win those, then we got to stop being so cute and actually make a network that messages from the left. Why we don't do it, I do not know. And it's something that I'm working on. But we got to start messaging, not just in 30-second campaign ads, but messaging in television shows like food shows and travel shows and entertainment shows and sports shows that speak from a Democratic perspective. If we believe, and the thing that's shocking to me is that we have this massive population of young people who are huge consumers that Nike got its head around, right, in terms of advertising, that would absorb a show about sports from the athlete's perspective and a progressive, justice-based platform. You could have an entire sports show about NCAA and professional sports that focuses on what the athletes go through, what the families go through, what the recruits do, and all of this. And why don't we have that? But I think that's something that we absolutely need to build if we plan to compete for Texas, South Carolina, North Carolina, and consolidate Georgia. We got to get behind the idea that it is our job to make Democrats. So thank you for your question, Tressa. Our question from Rochelle Voss. Are you putting your hat in the ring to rid us of Little Marco? I'm not doing anything but what I'm doing right now for now. I haven't landed on what my future plans are in terms of running for office, because I think it's premature. I think until we commit that we're going to actually compete for Florida, it's not worth it for anybody, to be honest. Do we have great people that could potentially be our next governor? Absolutely. Absolutely. And some of them you may be familiar with, some of them you may not be familiar with, but let me tell you, we got great people to be governor in our state. They're not going to be competitive unless we start weakening the target now, right? Same with our senatorial race. There's already somebody that's thrown his hat in the ring. There are others that are looking at it. Do we have a chance of unseating Marco? Absolutely, especially if he gets primaried by Ivanka. That's going to create World War III internally in the GOP. But are we going to win if we don't weaken that target now? This is a very expensive state, just like Texas. So if the party decides it's not going to go all in to win, if the country doesn't decide that it's going to go all in to win Florida, then we're not going to, right? I think it comes down to that. I have so much respect for Stacey Abrams and LaTosha Brown and Quinn and all those people who helped flip Georgia. But let me tell you something. That wouldn't have happened if they didn't get both financial and boots on ground help from all over the country. That's how we won Florida. We won Georgia because we decided we wanted Georgia. And Stacey was willing to put in the work early. She didn't wait until the 6 weeks between the primary and the general election to decide she wanted Georgia. So if you want Florida, we start deciding now that we want it, and we start working now. That's how we win Florida. That's how we win Texas or anywhere else. Question from Stacey Diaz. Are you starting a group like Stacey Abrams' New Georgia Project? I was like, well, I'm certainly open to it. It's just a question of, are there resources out there that are interested in investing in Florida? If there are, I'm happy to do it. I mean, I'm happy to put boots on the ground and start organizing and building those social connections. I mean, like I said, the Black community in Florida is dispersed. It is very dispersed, but there are connection capabilities here. I mean, our HBCUs in this state are ubiquitous. If you know anything about FAMU, if you know anything about Bethune-Cookman, you know that, or Edward Waters or Florida Memorial, their graduates are all over the state. We could use that as a tool to connect and build and start building social pressure to get involved in politics and political process. Are we doing that? Not yet. We could, but we're not. I mean, we have a ton of Black churches in Florida. I've been to many of them, right? Because that was, like I said, when I started out in politics as a senatorial candidate, that was the only place I could go. So I went to every Rock of Truth. I've been to the Primitive Baptist, the Holiness, the Pentecostal, the Missionary Baptist, the AME, you name it, I've been there. Kojic, I've been there, right? Well, can we not connect these pastors together and get them to start really thinking about empowering their people to get involved? Yes, we can. Have we built the structure to do that? What we do is we figure out who the big pastors are in any particular area and then ask candidates ask for the opportunity to speak to the congregation. That's it. Not enough. Not enough. If we want to bring those Black churches back to the forefront in mobilizing Black voters, then we need to be doing something for them now. And we need to do it in a meaningful way, not in a transactional, temporary way. That's how you get them really excited about voting and expressing their power. If you think Georgia is kind of feeling itself, then you should be wondering what the Black people of Florida are thinking. And we're thinking like, we wish we were Georgia, right? So, and by that I mean, we wished that the country decided Black Floridians are as important to turn out as Black Georgians. And if we conclude that they are, and we start pouring the resources and the structure in to make that so, then I absolutely think we're going to see not just good or even great African-American turnout in 2022. I think we're going to see blow them out the water African-American turnout in 2022. Don't forget that the Republican Party has revealed itself. Don't forget that Florida is a southern state. Don't forget that it ain't that long ago when Jim Crow was reality for Black people in this state. That's a incredibly powerful tool if we know how to use it. Let's see. Can Stacey's plan be cloned in Florida? It can't be cloned because Stacey's plan was applicable to a state that had a different kind of demographic makeup and concentration. But the principles in it can absolutely be used and help in organizing, especially the northern part of Florida that looks a lot like southern Georgia. That is a plan I think that absolutely can be useful there, and I hope to see it made to fruition. Can you crowdfund a Save Florida project using ActBlue? I guess. I mean, you have to set up a 501c3 or C4 or something. You have to set up something. And I'm certainly open to anybody that wants to help set something up for that purpose. But I don't want it twisted. We need two things here. We need the ground infrastructure that's driving natural Democrats to become involved and to register and be Democrats. And we need the air cover messaging. We need both. We need the air cover messaging. And that's way more money and way more, that's like Project Lincoln level. That's at that level, right? And I'm not a person that accesses that kind of money. But if you got an in with Michael Bloomberg or Tom Steyer or whoever out there's got the quadrillions to do that, please let them know that Pam Keith is ringing the alarm and saying, hey, guys, we have a terrible governor who's very vulnerable if we simply make the case that he sucks. We have a very feckless senator that nobody truly likes or trusts that's extremely vulnerable if we just make the case that it sucks. But you got to make that in a ubiquitous sort of ad kind of way. And I can't do that from the ground. So I don't know if that answers your question. Let's see. Any other questions? Or comments, parting shots, words of wisdom. I feel like I've taken up a lot of your time, but the reason some of you may be asking, like, well, why is Pam Keith doing this? Like, who's she? Good question. The reason I'm doing it is because I don't see anybody else doing it. And maybe just that we've got a new Florida Democratic Party chair and a new executive director, and they're just sort of getting their feet wet and getting, their structures in order. Maybe they plan on doing this all along. I don't know. I haven't heard anything to that effect. But I think they're great guys, and I wish them nothing but great success. And I'm willing to work with anybody. I'm willing to work with New Florida Majority or Organized Florida or Dream Keepers or whatever. I'm willing to work with anybody to help get this thing going. But I need people to start thinking differently about the mission of the Democratic Party. It is not just turning out Democrats. It's making Democrats too. And in some places in this country, that's very easy because everybody around them is Democrat, and there's messaging that they get, through music and arts and all this other stuff that reinforces Democratic values. But here, not so much. So if we want Democrats in Florida, then we have to decide that it is our mission that we're going to make Democrats in Florida. Let's see. Next question. The R's have big dollar supporters support them. Do D's have any? Can they be engaged in the same way that to combat the R's? Yes, we do. Big dollar donors. Do I know them personally? No. Does somebody out there know them and know where that, what I call political venture capital is? I'm sure they do. And if they're watching this or they somehow see a recording of this, if you're one of those folks and you're looking to figure out how to invest in Florida in a way that makes sense and it's not money out the door, then I got answers for you, right? But we got to decide that we want Florida. And if we decide that we want Florida, then we got to decide we're going to do what it takes to win. And if we're going to do what it takes to win, it does take resources. This is a huge state. It's a huge state, 21 million people. So if we decide that we want it and we're going to fight for it, then we better start fighting now. Not waiting until we get a candidate or a nominee for sure. All right. Any other questions before I shut it down? Anything? I want to thank you for taking the time to hear me out. And it's been an hour and a half, which is plenty of time. And I want to thank you for caring about what's happening in Florida. I hope you were as energized as I was by what happened in Georgia. Georgia. And I am as grateful as I could possibly be to Stacy and Latasha and so many others who participated in turning Georgia a blue state. It is with every fiber of my being that I hope Stacy runs for governor of the state of Georgia. If she does, she's got me 100%. Whatever she needs, she got from me. But Black people delivered Georgia, and Black people can deliver Florida too. It just takes a little bit more work and a little bit different approach here because we're so dispersed. But we can do it with the right kind of investment and the right kind of strategy and plan. So I hope you are well. I'm going to leave you with my last pitch. If you are not following my Patreon page, please do. I spend that time on Patreon talking about the politics of the day and educating, empowering, and inspiring people and putting words to the things that won't be said. It's patreon.com, Pam Keith FL. And obviously, you can follow me on any social media platform. It's always the same tag, Pam Keith FL. Thank you for giving me your ears, your time, your attention, your passions, and your desires to see Florida go blue. Have a wonderful night.